You're trapped inside Osaka Castle in 1614. Outside, 200,000 enemy troops surround you. The wells are running dry, food stores are dwindling, and the constant bombardment has left sections of the outer walls in ruins. You haven't seen sunlight beyond these walls in 3 months, and winter is setting in. At night, you can hear the enemy drums pounding in the darkness, reminding you that sleep is a luxury. This isn't a movie. This was reality for thousands of samurai, servants, and civilians who found themselves on the wrong side of Japanese castle sieges. And surviving meant more than just fighting. It required a complex system of logistics, psychology, and engineering that most people never think about. Today, we're going inside the walls to discover what it actually took to endure a siege in a Japanese castle, and why the people who survived were as much engineers and accountants as they were warriors. Introduction. Japanese castle sieges weren't quick affairs. Unlike European sieges that might last weeks, Japanese sieges could drag on for months or even years. The longest recorded siege in Japanese history, the Siege of Ishiyama Hongunji, lasted 11 years from 1570 to 1581. But here's what makes Japanese sieges unique. The castles weren't just military fortifications. They were complete urban centers housing thousands of people: samurai families, craftsmen, merchants, servants, and often entire communities who had fled there for protection. Himeji Castle, for example, could house up to 10,000 people during a siege. The geography of Japan created perfect conditions for extended sieges. Mountains and rivers created natural choke points where a well-positioned castle could control entire regions. But that same geography made resupply nearly impossible once a siege began. Japanese siege warfare developed its own distinct character during the Sengoku period, roughly 1467 to 1615, when constant warfare between competing daimyo made castle construction and siege techniques matters of survival. The introduction of firearms in the 1540s revolutionized siege warfare, but the basic challenge remained the same. How do you keep thousands of people alive inside stone walls when the outside world becomes your enemy? Chapter 1: The Fortress Ecosystem. A Japanese castle under siege wasn't just a building, it was a complete ecosystem designed to be self-sufficient for months. Every square meter had to serve multiple purposes, and every person had specific roles that went far beyond fighting. The typical Japanese castle complex consisted of multiple defensive rings. The outermost ring, the San no Maru, housed the majority of the population, including craftsmen, merchants, and their families. The Ni no Maru contained administrative buildings and residences for important retainers. The innermost, Honmaru, held the main keep and the lord's private quarters. Each ring had its own water supply, food storage, and defensive capabilities. If attackers breached the outer defenses, the remaining rings could function independently. This system meant that a castle might continue to resist even after losing significant portions of its defenses. Water was the most critical resource. Japanese castle builders became masters of hydroengineering, creating complex systems of wells, cisterns, and channels that could supply thousands of people indefinitely. Matsumoto Castle had 7 different water sources, including a secret well that could only be accessed from within the main keep. The well systems weren't just about quantity, they were about security. Many castles had hidden wells that attackers couldn't locate or poison. Some wells were connected to underground streams that flowed beneath the castle foundations, making them nearly impossible to cut off. Food storage required sophisticated preservation techniques and careful inventory management. Castle storehouses, called kura, were built with thick walls and raised floors to protect against moisture, rodents, and temperature fluctuations. A well-prepared castle might store rice for 2 years of normal consumption. But storing food was only part of the challenge. Castle administrators had to manage complex rationing systems that could adjust consumption based on the expected length of the siege, the number of people to feed, and their relative importance to the defense. The castle's population during a siege included far more than just warriors. Craftsmen were essential for maintaining weapons and fortifications. Carpenters repaired damage from artillery, blacksmiths forged arrows and spear points, and armorers maintained the equipment that kept defenders effective. Medical personnel became crucial during extended sieges, not just for treating battle wounds, but for managing the diseases that inevitably spread in crowded, unsanitary conditions. Castle physicians had to understand everything from surgery to epidemic control. Women played vital roles that are often overlooked in military histories. They managed food preparation and distribution, cared for the wounded, and often served as informal intelligence networks within the castle. Some women were trained in combat and participated directly in the defense. Children weren't passive civilians. They served as messengers, helped with food preparation, and performed maintenance tasks that freed adults for more critical duties. During the siege of Odawara in 1590, children were used to carry messages between different sections of the castle because they could move through spaces too small for adults. Chapter 2: The Mathematics of Survival. Surviving a castle siege was ultimately a mathematical problem. How many people, consuming how much food and water, for how many days, with what probability of resupply or relief? Castle administrators who got these calculations wrong watched their people starve. Rice was the foundation of siege nutrition, but it couldn't be the only food source. A diet of only rice leads to beriberi within weeks. Castle stores included soybeans for protein, dried fish for additional nutrients, and preserved vegetables to prevent scurvy and other deficiency diseases. The standard calculation was that each adult required approximately 1 show of rice per day, about 1.8 liters, or roughly 1.4 kilograms. For a castle housing 5,000 people, that meant 7,000 kilograms of rice daily, or over 2,500 tons per year. These numbers determined the size and number of storage buildings required. But caloric requirements varied dramatically based on activity level and role. A samurai engaged in daily combat needed significantly more food than a craftsman working inside the castle. Pregnant women, nursing mothers, and growing children had different nutritional needs that had to be factored into distribution systems. Water calculations were even more critical. Each person needed approximately 15 liters per day for drinking, cooking, and minimal sanitation. A 5,000-person castle required 75,000 liters daily, roughly 75 cubic meters of water. This demanded either enormous storage capacity or reliable renewable sources. Fuel for cooking and heating presented another calculation challenge. Wood consumption could be enormous, especially during winter sieges. Castle engineers had to balance the need for warmth against the risk of depleting fuel supplies before the siege ended. Waste management became a critical factor in extended sieges. Poor sanitation could kill more people than enemy action through disease outbreaks. Castle designers incorporated sophisticated drainage and waste disposal systems, but these required constant maintenance and adequate water flow to function properly. The psychology of rationing was as important as the mathematics. Sudden, dramatic reductions in food allocation could cause panic and undermine morale. Successful castle administrators implemented gradual reductions that people could adapt to psychologically while maintaining the hope that conditions would improve. Inventory management required detailed record-keeping and constant monitoring. Castle administrators maintained daily logs of food consumption, water usage, and supply levels. These records had to account for spoilage, waste, and the varying needs of different population groups. Some castles implemented complex systems of food distribution that reflected social hierarchies, while ensuring minimum survival needs were met. The lord and his immediate family received full rations, important retainers received reduced but adequate portions, and common people received survival-level allocations, supplemented by whatever they could produce or forage within the castle grounds. Emergency food sources required advanced preparation and knowledge. Many castles maintained stocks of emergency foods that were culturally acceptable but nutritionally adequate. Items like konnyaku root, dried seaweed, and even tree bark that had been processed into edible forms. Chapter 3: The Engineering of Defense. Japanese castle engineering wasn't just about keeping enemies out. It was about keeping defenders alive and functional for months or years under siege conditions. Every architectural feature served multiple purposes related to survival under extreme conditions. The famous curved walls of Japanese castles, called mushagaishi, weren't just defensive. Their shape helped shed rainwater efficiently while creating complex internal drainage systems that prevented water accumulation and structural damage. Proper drainage was essential when hundreds of people were living in confined spaces. Stone foundation systems were engineering marvels that served defensive and practical purposes simultaneously. The technique called nozura zukuri used irregularly shaped stones fitted together without mortar, creating walls that could flex during earthquakes while remaining structurally sound. These foundations also incorporated drainage channels that prevented water damage. The internal layout of Japanese castles reflected sophisticated understanding of siege psychology and logistics. Narrow passages and complex routes between different levels made it difficult for attackers to navigate if they breached the walls, but they also helped control the movement of large populations during normal siege operations. Ventilation systems were crucial for maintaining air quality when thousands of people were confined in stone buildings. Japanese castle builders created sophisticated airflow systems using carefully positioned windows, doors, and internal passages that moved fresh air through living spaces while maintaining defensive security. Kitchen facilities had to accommodate massive food preparation requirements while managing fire risks that could destroy the entire castle. Large castles had multiple kitchen complexes with sophisticated fire prevention systems, including sand buckets, water reservoirs, and fire breaks that could contain accidental blazes. Storage architecture went far beyond simple warehouses. Different types of supplies required different storage conditions. Rice needed dry, well-ventilated spaces, while preserved fish required cool, humid conditions. Salt, which was essential for food preservation, needed completely moisture-free storage. The famous multi-story keeps of Japanese castles served as more than symbolic centers. They were vertical command and control systems that allowed defenders to coordinate activities across different sections of the castle complex. The height provided visual communication capabilities and served as final refuges if outer defenses were breached. Defensive innovations during the Sengoku period included adaptations for firearms. Gun ports, called teppuzama, were integrated into walls and towers to allow defenders to use arquebus and other firearms effectively. These modifications had to balance defensive capability with structural integrity. Hidden passages and secret rooms weren't just for dramatic effect. They served practical siege functions. Secret storage areas could hide critical supplies from attackers who breached the outer defenses. Hidden escape routes allowed messengers to leave the castle even when all known exits were blocked. Workshop spaces within castle complexes allowed defenders to manufacture and repair essential items during extended sieges. Blacksmith shops, carpentry workshops, and even small foundries enabled castles to maintain their defensive capabilities without external supply. Specialized defensive features included drop holes for pouring boiling water or oil on attackers, removable floorboards that could trap invaders, and complex gate systems that required multiple keys and coordinated operation to open. Chapter 4. The Psychological Warfare. The longest Japanese sieges weren't won by starvation or assault. They were won by psychological pressure that broke the will to resist. Understanding and managing morale became as important as managing food supplies. Isolation was one of the most devastating psychological weapons. Cut off from news of the outside world, defenders had no way to know if relief forces were coming, if their allies had been defeated, or if their cause was already lost. This uncertainty could be more demoralizing than actual hardship. Enemy psychological tactics included deliberate displays of abundance outside the castle walls. Besieging forces would set up elaborate camps with visible food supplies, comfortable accommodations, and signs of normal life to contrast with conditions inside the castle. Sound warfare was a constant factor. Attacking forces would maintain drums, gongs, and shouting throughout the night to prevent defenders from sleeping. The constant noise created stress and exhaustion that accumulated over weeks and months. Visual intimidation included displaying captured banners, heads of defeated enemies, or other symbols designed to convince defenders that resistance was hopeless. These displays were positioned where castle defenders could see them clearly from the walls. Maintaining morale required active countermeasures. Successful castle commanders organized entertainment, religious ceremonies, and social activities that helped maintain community bonds and provide psychological relief from siege stress. Some castles even conducted counter-siege tactics, nighttime sally raids, surprise archer attacks, or the sending of hidden messengers to allied forces. These small acts of defiance reminded both sides that the defenders had not yet broken. Communication with the outside world became crucial for morale. Even when physical relief was impossible, messages that confirmed the defender's cause was still alive could dramatically improve willingness to continue resistance. The social hierarchy within the castle had to be maintained carefully. If common people saw samurai receiving dramatically better treatment, resentment could undermine the collective will to resist. Successful commanders found ways to maintain necessary distinctions while sharing some hardships equitably. Religious observances provided psychological anchoring during extreme stress. Buddhist and Shinto ceremonies gave people framework for understanding their suffering and hope for eventual relief or honorable death. Rumors and misinformation spread rapidly in confined populations under stress. Castle commanders had to actively manage information flow, confirming accurate news while countering harmful rumors that could cause panic. The treatment of women and children became a critical morale factor. Protecting non-combatants was seen as a measure of the castle's honor and the commander's competence. Visible failure to protect the vulnerable could undermine support among the defenders. Work assignments that gave people meaningful roles in the defense helped maintain morale. Even non-combatants could contribute to water management, food preparation, or maintenance activities that made them feel valuable to the collective effort. Hope management was perhaps the most delicate psychological challenge. Commanders had to maintain optimism without making promises they couldn't keep. False hope followed by disappointment could be more demoralizing than honest acknowledgement of difficult circumstances. Chapter 5. The Breaking Point. Every siege eventually reached a breaking point where continued resistance became impossible. Understanding these limits meant the difference between negotiated surrender and complete destruction. Starvation rarely killed people directly. It weakened them until diseases that would normally be survivable became fatal. Typhus, dysentery, and other infections spread rapidly through malnourished populations living in crowded conditions. water shortage created cascading failures throughout the castle ecosystem. Without adequate water, sanitation systems failed, food preparation became impossible, and disease spread accelerated. Many castles surrendered not from lack of food, but from epidemic outbreaks caused by water problems. Structural failures could force surrender even when supplies remained adequate. Constant bombardment, inadequate maintenance, and the stress of housing far more people than designed capacity could cause critical building failures that made continued defense impossible. Social breakdown within the castle often preceded military defeat. When rationing systems failed, when disease overwhelmed medical capacity, or when leadership lost credibility, the organized resistance that made castle defense possible simply disintegrated. The decision to surrender required complex calculations about honor, survival, and consequences. Surrender might save the lives of non-combatants while ensuring death for the military leadership. These decisions reflected sophisticated understanding of medieval Japanese concepts of duty and acceptable loss. Negotiated surrenders were often preferable to assault for both sides. Attacking forces could avoid the casualties and time required for final assault, while defenders could sometimes secure better treatment for their people by surrendering before complete defeat. The timing of surrender was crucial. Too early, and the commander would be seen as cowardly or incompetent. Too late, and the attacking forces might be too angry or committed to offer reasonable terms. Some castles chose final resistance, fighting to the death rather than surrendering. These decisions were based on calculations about honor, the likelihood of acceptable surrender terms, and the broader political consequences of defeat. The process of surrender itself required careful negotiation and ceremony. Both sides had to maintain face while transitioning from violent opposition to peaceful resolution. These negotiations could take days or weeks to complete properly. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. The end of a siege marked the beginning of complex processes of rebuilding, punishment, and integration that reflected the broader political and social structures of medieval Japan. Successful defenders gained enormous prestige that could elevate their status within the feudal hierarchy. A well-conducted defense demonstrated military competence, administrative skill, and personal courage that daimyo valued highly. Failed defenders faced consequences that varied dramatically based on the circumstances of their defeat and the policies of their conquerors. Some faced execution, others were allowed honorable suicide, and some were integrated into the winning side's forces. The treatment of non-combatants after siege depended heavily on how the siege ended. Negotiated surrenders usually included protections for civilians, while castles taken by assault often faced harsh treatment as examples to other potential resistors. Reconstruction efforts revealed the true cost of siege warfare. Damaged buildings, depleted supplies, and traumatized populations required extensive resources and time to restore. Some castles were simply abandoned as too expensive to repair. The lessons learned from each siege influenced the design and preparation of future fortifications. Successful siege techniques were studied and countered, while effective defensive innovations were copied and improved. Conclusion. Enduring a siege in a Japanese castle required far more than military courage. It demanded sophisticated engineering, precise mathematical planning, and deep understanding of human psychology under extreme stress. The people who survived these ordeals weren't just warriors. They were administrators, engineers, doctors, and community leaders who understood that survival required the coordinated effort of entire populations working together under impossible conditions. Their innovations in architecture, logistics, and social organization influenced Japanese culture for centuries and provide insights into human resilience that remain relevant today. The next time you see a Japanese castle, remember that its beauty and elegance emerged from one of history's most demanding survival challenges. Thanks for watching. In the next episode, we explore the dangers of traveling across Japan in the Edo period.